welcome to.
I call this meeting to order.
All right, it's 1:32. And then instead of doing roll call, since we are so short on attendance, probably be easier just to do introductions. So I am Jeff Herron, and I think all of you know by now that I am our Director of the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention.
I'm Marissa Webb, and I'm the Continuum of Care Coordinator.
I'm Jackie Long. I'm the Director of Housing and Grants for Mountain Comprehensive Care Center.
I'm Mackenzie Willoughby. I'm with Mountain Comp Care as well, and I do housing compliance.
I'm Diane Fleet, Associate Director of Greenhouse 17, and I'm only here for 30 minutes, so you'll be the lone board person, but yeah.
I'm Allison Compton. I'm housing coordinator at Greenhouse 17.
David Shadd, I'm Director of Programs at the Hope Center.
Liz Sheehan, council member for the HPI board.
Alicia Buras, I'm program manager for the SSBF program at Volunteers of America Mid-States.
All right, the first item on our agenda after introductions is approval of the meeting minutes from October 5th, which were included in the packet. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second it.
All right. Any discussion, needed corrections? I wasn't in attendance at this meeting, so try to rely on Marissa to help us look at them, but let us know if there's anything that we need to correct or adjust. All right. I guess we'll go ahead and vote all those in favor. This will be a full membership vote.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. Moving forward, I know we're still working on kind of carving out the new identity for this particular committee. And so I wanted to at least have some concrete items that we could follow on the agenda rather than kind of the stream of consciousness that was kind of going on some previous agendas. So one item that we definitely needed to tackle was the data quality plan. We usually have that updated in October of each year, and we're just a little bit behind this year in getting that updated and out to everyone. So I can let Marissa kind of give you a little bit of an intro on that, and then we can have some discussion.
Thank you. So pertaining to the data quality plan, a lot of this is carried over from last year, 2022. As we go into 2023, I did double check all of the reports that are referenced as we moved from art reporting into business objects, and they are all still there. So that should still be acceptable. The HMIS standards have not changed or not expected to change, so hence why they all have remained the same. But one thing I did want to direct everyone's attention to is a change in the housing inventory count. That is on page 6 if you're reviewing in the packet of the data quality plan. And the big difference is in that procedure. You will see in the first bullet point where it states that emergency shelter, transitional housing and permanent housing projects must submit a housing inventory count that is reflective of bed and inventory on the last Wednesday of each quarter, and those dates are following thereafter. I know previously that the housing inventory count was conducted via Google Forms, and I'm more than happy to continue that methodology moving forward into 2023. It would, each project would need its own housing inventory count. This would be information that we would put into HMIS as a way to make sure that we are collecting that data that is accurate. And as you'll see, the first date of that last Wednesday of each quarter is going to be during Lex count. So that's already factored in. If you see on page 8, which is when those report due dates are, you will see that is when it is already factored in to include when those quarterly HIC reports are due, along with the other data quality reports.
So, as Marissa mentioned, the primary change there was around the housing inventory count. Under Polly, we kind of moved away from soliciting those forms from agencies directly, and the OHBI tried to just keep track of all the inventory. What I find is that it might just be helpful to have a few points throughout the year that we're getting some input from the providers directly. As I was trying to do the housing inventory count independently of having a form to reference, sometimes there were things that occur within our system that we're not always explicitly made aware of. Maybe there's in the shelter a space that's under renovation, so some beds are temporarily offline. Maybe we're not aware of exactly how many units that a program has leased or occupied at a given time. So it's just a move to try to make sure that we have as accurate information as possible. I don't want to make it burdensome for the providers, so definitely as we move into this, if there are ways that we can improve this process or make it easier for you as providers, we want to make sure that it's not too much of an ask. But I, again, want to make sure that we just have opportunities to get some information for you to verify what we believe your inventory is, because there are some challenges in doing that without some ongoing communication. Does anybody have any discussion, questions, or concerns around the data quality plan?
So can you send out those forms to everybody instead of just having them live on the Google Drive? I literally can never find it.
Yeah, if we did the Google route, we would provide you with links and we would make sure that it's easy to find. But if the preference would be to do it just by having a form that's submitted by email, we can do that as well.
So does it get submitted? I've never had to do this. Does it get submitted through the Google Drive?
Yes, it would be submitted through the Google Drive and then would be available to our office as like an Excel spreadsheet where it's already provided that information.
Okay.
The only real difference, because we would be able to print and distribute that for everyone, the only difference is that on the Google Drive or through Google Forms, if you click emergency shelter, you're only going to be viewing the questions pertaining to emergency shelter versus the printed out, which will say, please skip if not applicable.
Gotcha.
So it will just be longer and you have to read more carefully. But other than that.
Okay, well, if it'll just submit through Google Drive, we can just make sure we have.
Yeah, and we'll also make sure that the version of this that gets approved fully by the board, once it goes out to everyone, would include that hyperlink and PDF form, make it really easy to get back to. We just didn't necessarily think there wasn't a good way to really present a Google form in this meeting.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I can never find anything.
Well, and to that point also, we are working presently on some revisions to the website, and one of the areas that we are asking Untold to put some time and energy into is some resources for partners that are going to collect some of the various different Google Drive links that we have and house them all in one location so that you're not constantly having to go back to previous emails or things.
It's perfect.
Or bookmarking it, make it a little easier.
Okay. It makes me feel really old. It's like, can I just not operate it or something?
Anything else that we need to discuss around the plan? Then we would just need a motion if we want to move forward.
I will make that motion.
All right.
I'll take the burden off.
Is there a second?
Thank you. Second.
All right. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. So going into continuing business, I tried to pull from previous meeting minutes some of the ideals that it seemed like the group was more interested in trying to take on or do some work. One item was the returns to homelessness review. I believe there was going to be a work group that was going to take that on, work on identifying the persons that are returning within our system, and then kind of do some case conferencing around what we can learn from those cases and how we can adapt our system to try to prevent future returns. I believe Dylan had been kind of taking the lead on that, who's obviously not with us today. Is there any updates or conversation among those that are with us?
Go ahead.
I just say nothing that I know of.
Okay.
I was just going to speak to several months ago now, pretty much right after it had been discussed at this committee meeting in depth. Myself and Dylan attended a meeting with Greenhouse 17 to see if we can get ideas and perhaps a format for how to structure those meetings in a way that is productive and also does not potentially point blame at any particular agency or individual, etc., in an individual's return to homelessness. Following that meeting, I know that Dylan stated that he would be doing a little bit more research about if it may be best for a facilitator to be involved, what that would look like, that structure, how often, in setting up those parameters. But we have not discussed any further following that. But that does not mean that he is not diligently working on it, just that I'm unaware.
So it doesn't sound like that group is actually kind of meeting regularly right now. So I will follow up with Dylan and try to work towards establishing maybe an initial date for that group to come together and then share that with everyone. So I apologize that we're not able to get a little bit further on that one. Next, I placed on the agenda program and system performance benchmarks and strategies. So to give a little bit of context here, there's two reasons why I put this on the agenda. One would be in support of our Program Performance and Evaluation Committee. In that committee, we've been doing a great job of getting to hear from providers and know a little bit more about what they do, what their experiences are, the challenges and successes that they're having. But in terms of the actual data that's presented within that committee, I think it would be helpful for us to have a little bit more of a guide of what we actually want providers to be presenting. One, just because I think it would help us to do a little bit more comparisons of programs within our system. It would help us to better identify what things across our system seem to be a challenge or a struggle or an area for improvement. We also would have the ability for my office to really work with individuals to make sure that we are developing strategies to help you with reporting on that data, making sure that we can get some of what you need out of HMIS, make sure that the data that's being presented is accurate and sound data that we can really rely on. So that's one part of this. And the other part is we also, in our annual COC competition process, have several different system performance measures that we are increasingly being evaluated on, with higher point values being assigned there. And we have some benchmarks that we need to hit, but we're also awarded points on our system's strategies in each of those areas. So this office has done what it can to talk about the work that we're doing in each of those areas, but I feel like we'd be better served by coming together and maybe having a body, whether that be one of our existing committees or a subcommittee or a work group, that would work to formalize and put into written policies some of those strategies that we have to meet our performance targets, so that when we go to draft that application, we have something a little bit more concrete to include in our consolidated application. So I wasn't able to get it out in time for this packet, but I've started by putting together some information regarding some of the benchmarks that we presently use. And you'll find that it's not going to be exhaustive. For example, we don't really have established benchmarks for street outreach and for some program types. Most of our benchmarks are going to be for rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. But it's a kind of starting point for us to see what we do have and then kind of fill in the gaps. So the first section is going to focus on system-wide performance measures, and this is largely going to be that stuff in the consolidated application through the COC process. And these are the areas that HUD evaluates the COC when we go through that application. And so for each measure, I've given you what the benchmark that we have to meet in order to receive those points is, as well as the data set that HUD's going to look at in the universe of programs and clients that are going to be included within those measures. So most of them are going to be housed in terms of a certain percentage of increase or decrease that we're trying to establish over the previous years. And most of them are going to come from the system performance measure report that we submit currently in the spring of each year. So oftentimes, like when we did the COC process this year, we were actually looking at comparisons from HUD fiscal year 20 to 21. So oftentimes we're looking at data that's a little bit kind of removed from where we currently are. There's not really ways for us to go back and change the performance from the past. That's why it's also important that we have that piece where we beef up our strategies so that if we fail to meet one of these benchmarks and don't receive those points, we can potentially regain some points by presenting HUD with sound strategies. So I don't want to necessarily read everything to you, but I wanted to make sure this was available. And then additionally, on the last page is going to be program-specific performance measures. For those, like I said, it's primarily going to be just on rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. For rapid rehousing, there are a few benchmarks that are nationally established benchmarks. And then there's what we've used on our local COC competition process. For permanent supportive housing, when I started this work, we used to have established HUD benchmarks, and then those kind of disappeared, and no one's really talking about those benchmarks anymore. So unfortunately for permanent supportive housing, I just had our local benchmarks that we've been using in our competition process. So again, the primary intent here was really just to show everyone and share with you what benchmarks that we currently do have. We do still need to develop some more program benchmarks that would address things like emergency shelter and street outreach, programs that we don't currently have much for. But we also need to kind of determine where we want this work to be accomplished and how. So program performance and evaluation seems to really kind of have a full calendar just getting through those reviews. And I thought it also might fit best within this committee that deals exclusively with data, how we want to use data, how we want to try to push systems forward and connect different systems. So for me, it kind of felt like it might fall within this committee. But I want the input of the membership for how we would kind of move forward. Any thoughts?
I think it gives some direction to this committee to take that on. We're trying to figure out what we're doing.
Yeah, and so I see this as something that as I'm trying to carve out an identity for this committee, for me this is kind of a natural item that I feel falls here. But I don't like making decisions without the input of our board and our committees. So I think this could be a pathway to helping us really establish what this group is trying to do. How do you all feel about it living here with us? Or do you think it would be better served to be housed in program performance?
I like it here because we're looking at system-wide stuff. talking about this in the other meeting, I also kind of thought that it would come to this committee. So I agree.
And we could also split it too if we wanted this group to focus on system-wide and for program performance to focus on program-specific. I just think there may be some benefit to keeping it together as a whole. I think sometimes when we try to split lenses and focus solely on higher level or more micro level, it's sometimes easy to lose the relationship between the two. Obviously, I want your input since this would impact your committee.
Well, I have a couple thoughts. But I would like to hear from the providers who have to do these presentations and use these metrics. I like having something to compare to, so I really like having, for the PPE committee, I really like the idea of having the standards of kind of measurement for the programs. But I think they should be together because I think they're related, and so I think it's okay for this group to be setting a standard and setting the benchmark and talking about all of this, but then it's kind of applied in the other committee in the discussions. And just as someone who, again, I'm not a provider and I don't come from that background, I think it has been hard for me to, as a person on that committee and on the board as a whole, to like evaluate applications that we get and like looking at funding for later. I feel like this would help provide some structure to that going forward so that it helps the committee as a whole and the board as a whole when we're doing evaluations. Kind of related to this, for PPE, I would also like to see a little bit more standardization in the presentations that are actually given. And that was something I was going to talk to you about because I haven't even seen the instructions that like programs are provided, because I came in like halfway through the year as the chair.
And I know at some point there were some instructions, but to be honest, I don't know how recently any of that was sent out. And so just based on my experience in the committee, it seems like everyone's kind of just coming forward and presenting what they think is important or helpful. And I agree that, especially for those that aren't providers, it would make the presentations more meaningful if we kind of had some standardization.
Yeah, and I think so too, and I think it helps the people who have to present to know, to have more structure, and I think this is a good place to start for structure, is having this discussion. But then I think, again, it applies over, and I think we've seen in that committee, some of the presentations are more detailed or do kind of follow some of these things, but then some aren't. And so I think having some of that standardization and having a continued discussion about what we want those to look like so we can do a better job of evaluating, supporting, moving things forward, I think that would be valuable.
So what about some of the providers that have gone through the process? Do you feel like it would be helpful to you to have a little bit more of a standard process, to have a little bit of a roadmap for what we're looking for in those presentations, and also the other part of this being to help you kind of monitor performance throughout the year?
I think it would be tremendously helpful. One, because I think we have a tendency just to kind of throw things at the wall and hope that it's something that people are wanting to hear. So I think that would be really helpful. And being somewhat new to being a representative of this board, I don't mean to ask questions that have already been kind of fleshed out a little bit. But one of the things I wondered too, like on the performance piece, is so certainly kind of following Housing First model and getting people housed and all those things, but we sort of operate programming that folks will usually stay with us for about 4 months because we really like to do a lot of healing, respite, that kind of work a little bit to get them grounded so that when we start looking for housing, then they might be at a little more of a place to kind of latch on and stay. And so when I was looking at some of the goals, is to be 60 days from entry that they're housed, and I'm just curious if if some programs like ours might jeopardize a little bit of the pitch, that we're requesting in HUD, because we like our folks to stay a
Yeah.
little bit longer.
And so I think that is something that's a valid point. I think we have to definitely look at the nuances of what providers do. But like, for example, on the program performance measures, under the COC application process, when we are operating that local competition, our scoring and ranking tool usually for any programs, like for DV specifically, will have an ability for us to customize what the target is for DV programs, knowing that the clients that you serve sometimes have different challenges and strengths than what other providers might see in their clients. So like, I know we allow around returns, usually a higher rate of return for DV targeted programs, because of how often that's usually, for a lot of survivors, a cyclical process that takes several times before they really truly escape domestic violence.
Right.
So knowing that might cause them, and also sometimes some of the things like the damage that can be done to things like their credit or the legal issues that they face, that sometimes perpetrators might re-enter their life and cause them to have to relocate for safety reasons. So I think there is ability for us to customize some of that to meet the needs of different types of programs. I don't want anyone to feel as if we're going to be setting performance measures that are going to either hurt them or vice versa, hurt the system. I think we can find ways to devise it so that it really speaks to what everyone truly does in true practice.
That sounds great. And I think, I also might have something different to add, but I think it's something we always grapple with at Greenhouse 17 is sort of what is that sweet spot, right? Of like, how long in community living is too long, but yet how short is, and I know it's different from individual to individual, but even just programmatically for us, it's sort of good to have that benchmark where we go, upon entry, we're sort of anticipating you'll be here for about 4 months. We can kind of customize knowing people need longer or less. But we have a wide gamut, don't we? We'll have some people stay 8 months, and then we have some people stay 3 weeks or something.
And I think we need to know that information too, so that we're not just putting forth a scoring and ranking tool that holds everyone to a certain measure. Maybe there's something we don't know that we need to be accounting for and creating more flexibility.
Yeah.
Any other input?
I think using these, and I, like you, have kind of weird programs. And I remember when I had my presentation, it was just like, just give us some outcomes. Like that was my guidance. And so having this, when we have programs that don't fit, also gives an opportunity for discussion on what some of those obstacles are. So I think it's beneficial to have this, even if we don't fit very neatly into what this is. I mean, obviously these don't really work for like street outreach, but for shelter.
That's like one area we need to know what are our performance targets for street outreach. I know nationally there is not necessarily set standards.
Right.
So locally, what do we think is reasonable? What are we striving towards that pushes us forward but is realistic for our programs? And that's one of the areas that I would really like to have a process like this to get us somewhere to where we can objectively step back and say, we're making progress.
Right.
And right now, I'm not sure that we really have the ability to say that, because we don't really have, we have 3 street outreach teams, and I couldn't tell you necessarily if the outcomes that they're looking for based on their initial funding applications are really going to align.
Yeah, and like, for instance, our outreach team was just meant to be like supplemental because of the COVID epidemic. The only outcomes in that presentation, or in the proposal, because I wrote it, were number of contacts.
Yeah, I was pretty sure that was the case.
That really doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. It's like probably the most useless.
You could have
metrics.
contact with 20 people and make a significant difference in those 20 clients' lives, or you could interact with 200 and maybe make no difference.
Exactly. So I think that is important when you're evaluating, especially so many different programs. If everyone has like a set of guidelines to go by, so. And I'm sure we all have ideas of what that should be, but basically you're looking at things like being referred to housing and successfully housed and moved out of being unsheltered in some way, different things like that. But that's going to look different than some of the other programs, but that doesn't mean, we can't come up with.
I also think this could be something that's helpful to the providers in pursuing things like funding.
Right.
For example, I know your Pleasant Street outreach funding we know is coming to an end within the next year, and as you look to identify other sources, it would be really great if you could say something like, we helped to refer X number of clients to permanent housing. And when we don't set systems up where we know we want to track certain information from the onset, it's so much harder to go back and piece that together after the fact and arrive at that information. So I see this as something that hopefully moves us in a direction that benefits everyone. It benefits programs, systems, clients.
And I think for our then PPE committee, it helps, like these things like you're talking about, the exceptions or like challenges that you may face are part of the discussion that we have. And I think that's oftentimes the most robust part of the discussion that we have, where it's then we're like figuring out, well, how do we help, how do we, move forward. So I think that's okay to like set some like baseline goals, but then understand that,
There's nuance.
Yeah. So with this piece, it sounds like everyone presently is okay with leaving it here in this committee. My plan would be, unless we have other thoughts, to just keep it as an ongoing agenda item, and we can do a little bit of work each meeting and maybe also kind of set some goals for homework we're going to do in between meetings so that we can slowly work to fill in some of these gaps and make the conversations a little bit more robust in the future. Obviously, we're going to have to make sure that we have the right providers at the table when we get into each program area. And I don't think we're equipped to do that today. But I think introducing the concept and kind of knowing that we do have a kind of plan and process will be helpful to facilitate that moving forward.
Can I ask a question? I know in this, all of these items of continuing business, on the Senior Services Commission, there's actually kind of like they do like breakout groups, and you like actually have some of your work meeting like during the commission meeting. And I'm wondering if some of that might help here, where you have like these different areas, like people could actually meet during this time to kind of move some of this forward. Like maybe there are 3 people who are really interested in working on this, but then other people wanting to work on the housing triage policy, and this could be like some of that space.
Chicky back in the day, have breakout groups. I'm open to it, because another challenge that we've kind of had with this committee is when it was HMIS coordinated entry, it tended to operate at a very technical level that made it like really inaccessible for a lot of people. And then since it's kind of found its new name and kind of goal, it's kind of just struggled with finding an identity. And so with both of those, there's been, I feel like, a little bit of a challenge in getting a lot of active participation. And I think potentially something like breakout groups, it allows us to do work in meetings and not necessarily have to take it back to our everyday jobs and try to fit it in between meetings. And it might help encourage a little bit more active participation. What I don't want is for everyone to have to come to a room and just listen to the OB staff talk at them for an hour and a half or 2 hours. I would like to be able to have, like we do in other committees, we typically have certain items that are going to be presented out by individuals, and this committee hasn't really had that traditionally. So it would be nice if there was a little bit more voice coming from the membership.
Well, and even in the senior services model, it's like you even do the report out like at that meeting. So it's like you talk about it, you discuss, and then you say what your action steps were that you just talked about. So it's like it's very productive, it feels like. But
I feel like it would also allow us to tackle multiple areas or issues without necessarily having to expand and have more meetings. Because if we move everything to its own like work group or subcommittee, then you're having to find additional time to facilitate more meetings.
Just
So
an idea.
I'm open to that. How do other people feel about that kind of a model moving forward? I think we'll obviously have to revisit the subject and get a greater amount of input. But for those of you that are here today, does that seem like a good or a bad idea?
If we have more people at the meetings.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that we don't have as many now because, like, the whole identity of this group, it was 1 month we're going to have more of the administrative people. 1 month we're going to have more of the user level of HMIS. So I think that if we, make it known that what we're going to do, then more people will be here. I think people are confused about this committee right now.
To be honest, coming into it, I'm a little confused as to what exactly. I think I understand a little bit what the intent was, but I don't.
Because you weren't even here.
I wasn't. No, like I met when we decided to change the name and they were still kind of playing around with what the format would be. And then the next time that I had this meeting, it was when it already had kind of moved to this model and it was just a list of like, here's some different ideals that we might want to do. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not sure what we're presently working on or what movement's been made because I wasn't a part of those conversations. So trying to put us back on track, I've largely just had like meeting minutes to go off of. And so that's where some of these came from because it seems like these were some of the topics that people actually had a little bit more conversation around. But I want to get us back to a spot where this meeting feels productive enough that people want to attend it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, there's no point in having a committee.
I think if we make it like a meeting where we do breakout groups or we all just have some robust discussion, because I think all of these really need to be visited and revisited and
for me, there's a lot of things that we're not really actively working on that fit with the title and kind of spirit of this committee. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if we don't get it back on track soon, we're going to find ourselves in some tough situations in the future because we're not going to have items that we really need to move forward, to write certain applications, to take certain steps. So I definitely welcome any input over how to better make this committee useful to those that attend, being both our membership and providers, but also like our board members and those that maybe aren't providers. I want to make sure that this is something that helps them to build their knowledge and to make sure that when they do have to do something like have a funding conversation, that they feel comfortable on evaluating that and that it doesn't require necessarily this office to just say, these are the recommendations that we would give you. I want them to be able to say critically, yes, we agree with that recommendation, or I think we need to make consideration about this program does this, and so maybe there's a reason they can't meet this benchmark. And I just think it would be really helpful to refocus this committee a little bit.
I do too.
So, and moving forward, do we want to do this split focus, frontline, high level, executive? Is that something that
I don't even understand it.
that we're really married to? Because I wasn't a part of this conversation, so I don't know how strongly people feel about it. But to me, looking just from the couple meetings I've been in and the meeting minutes, it feels like there was initially this idea that we would switch every other time, and we kind of just got stuck on the front line. And we never really had enough content or material. If I'm going to bring executive leadership from organizations together, I have to have something that's worth their time. They're not going to give me the time of day and even show up if I can't say that there's something on the agenda that they really want to be a part of the discussion. And so I haven't felt comfortable to say, okay, this month we're doing executive leadership when I don't have a roadmap. So since we still kind of have this as a work in progress, I'm totally open to changing that if we don't think it works. I also feel like there are other groups and other meetings that are trying to accomplish some of that system integration stuff. Bluegrass, BC3, the meetings that I think Health First and UK Healthcare are doing, they're trying to do a lot of that system alignment work. They're also kind of toying around with what level they want to operate on, the frontline kind of level or the more macro stuff. It seems like a lot of that is a duplication kind of that group. I know Eastern State Hospital is supposed to be resuming some of its provider meetings. There's a lot of other groups that I feel like are also kind of doing work in this space. And I feel like people are sometimes going to be more likely to attend some of those other meetings because they're going to see our meeting as, oh, the homeless system meeting. And I don't know that we're going to necessarily accomplish attracting the other systems to be able to function at that particular level. That's just, again, stepping into it midway through my observations. I want to make sure that the steps we take are steps everybody agrees with.
I felt like when in the discussions, and again, I'm not a provider. I feel like I have to give that disclaimer constantly, but I felt I was having trouble following the conversations, and but my sense was that it was like trying to narrow down what this committee wanted to accomplish, but I don't think it was ever truly narrowed down. Like a planning meeting like that is really like very focused on this is what we're going to try to do for this year. I think that would help us then define the identity of the committee. And I personally lean on you all for like, these are the things we need to do. These should be the high priority items like this, But I would like to hear from other people on what their experiences are, what they think. But I feel like we need like a set of things that we want to accomplish for a shorter period of time instead of just like.
Yeah. That's helpful feedback. All right, so I'm going to kind of put a pause on this notion that we're going to switch lenses constantly, and we're going to use one lens right now, and we're going to focus that lens on the actual areas and items that we want to accomplish. And I think it would probably be a good idea for us to make sure that we're checking in February, since we are such a small group today, and kind of make sure that for the 2023 calendar year that we kind of have a standard list of areas that we really want to focus on.
Yeah, also, if we develop a list of things that we want to accomplish or some things that we want to focus on, then won't that kind of draw the people that need to be at those meetings to them instead of it being...
I feel like part of the reason there's not many people in this room today is because the last agenda that went out was kind of just like a list of different ideas. And I'm not really going to take my time to go and attend a meeting if I don't even know what's going to be truly discussed during that meeting. So I think you're right. That's one of the challenges we face.
If we have a goal that is going to meet that, we're going to need a lot of frontline staff or higher level. If we have those goals, then those people, we can ask them to come. Yeah, we can ask, if we want executive leadership for a particular item, we can ask them to attend and they can participate in that conversation, or if it's a breakout group, whatever it is, but they at least know when their input's needed. All right. Moving us forward, we need to do a little bit more work on housing triage policies and procedures, also coordinated entry. So I took a look at that most recent draft, and it still has references to an HMIS project that no longer exists. So we had kind of at one point two projects, so one that was more like those that were in housing crisis and those that were literally homeless. So that's one thing that just I need to work with Untold Content to get cleaned up and to reflect the true reality of what's being done in HMIS. But it looked like there was some discussions out of the last meeting. I think maybe Marty had raised the point of we're having a lot of struggles when we make referrals of folks not being document ready. A lot of that documentation is not being gathered during the time that folks sit on list. I know a lot of my housing providers are gonna definitely agree with this because they're trying to help persons fit into their programs when they don't necessarily have all the information they need. And it looked like the conversation last time might have been,
around how we address that. I know Kentucky Housing Corporation actually has different levels within their coordinated entry project. Someone can be entered into their coordinated entry project, but doesn't move on to their by name list until the time that those individuals are document ready. I don't necessarily want to do anything that would hinder somebody getting housed or housed quickly. But at the same time, there's real challenges to being able to quickly and efficiently serve people when that documentation is not in place. And I feel like if we were to do a deep dive into our current by name list, there's probably a small segment of those that actually have their documentation in place. To be honest, there's a lot of just general information in HMIS that's not being completed or completed correctly. And so we need a more efficient coordinated entry housing triage process if we're going to be able to truly ever get to a point where we are housing people quickly. So I wanted to address the group in knowing how do we want to move forward in addressing some of those challenges. Do we want to try to carve out a separate project or list of persons who are document ready? Do we want to make a policy that you have to be document ready before you even go on to coordinated entry? Like, how do we want to address some of the challenges that we're having? Because this is being seen across our entire system. Almost every housing provider has expressed to me at some point the trouble on having this documentation, and then especially when it comes to stuff like our unsheltered clients, the length of time that it takes to obtain that documentation if it's not established at the onset.
And then it puts us out of compliance with this. I think that a separate list, because you don't want to not put someone who's unsheltered on coordinated entry.
Right.
But then if you have two lists, then you know these people have either disability verification they need or homeless verification. It's usually permanent supportive housing that's the issue. So, and then that these people are ready to go, so that you're referring off of the ready to go, because the document ready people should obviously take precedence, I guess, over non-document ready, and then maybe that would encourage street outreach and other people who are putting people on the list to make sure they're also following through with documentation.
I think it would also just be helpful in allowing people to see who's not document
Yes.
ready. Because I think a lot of times providers think that they've done the work, that they've done what they needed to, but then we find in our office sometimes small mistakes that for example, prevent someone from ever even appearing on the report because the HMIS workflow wasn't completed correctly.
Yeah.
And when I point that out, when I discover it, sometimes it's significant time has passed, and I point that out, and they're like, oh, I didn't know what I did wrong. I didn't understand. Oh, okay, I didn't know. Well, if we had a whole separate list, you run that report, and you see the client that you're looking for is not there, you know that there's a problem that needs to be addressed in order to get them onto that list.
And street outreach will be able to see, like, if they're trying to move someone towards housing, they can see it and go, oh, there's something they still need. They're not document ready. So it's just been, because it's a struggle on the permanent supportive housing side to establish chronic homelessness. And with our program, especially because the people that were rolled over from the high utilizer program, a lot of them didn't already have there was a lot of self-certification.
Yeah.
So I'm really bound to just 3 months self-certification in the program now. So it's really hard if someone hasn't documented. And if they would document that, like, every time they meet with someone, I know it's hard and I know people hate going into HMIS, but when Street Outreach meets with someone, if they went in and put that in the current living situation, then we have an HMIS record of people so that it's easier.
Yeah, you would be able to look there and say, oh, okay, Hope Center Street Outreach had a contact, could verify on this date the individual was unsheltered.
Yeah, or we should be able to even just print that out of HMIS and use it at that
If
point.
it's properly entered and they put in the information that says that they can verify and everything, to me, that's strong documentation.
Yeah, and that's like that's the most desirable documentation is HMIS.
Yeah.
So I just think we do need to work on.
Because even in some of those high utilizer type meetings, the challenge that I have is I know that there are folks that are vulnerable, but I know that a lot of the programs I have that we can potentially refer them to have certain documentation and eligibility requirements that even if Street Outreach is saying to me, oh, this person has a lot of needs, well, do we have what we need to actually facilitate this referral?
Yeah, there's a gap between they've got needs, there's a program over here, but they have requirements, so you got to somehow meet in the middle and document it.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of times with those high utilizers too, there's not always sleeping on the streets, and so we need to be able to document the times that they're sleeping on the streets or whatever in HMIS because they're not going to shelters.
Right.
The shelter stays are easy, but it's the people who are street homeless that is, and we know that they've been homeless for a long time, but just knowing it isn't enough.
Right. David, let me ask you, since you're kind of operating a lot of times on the front end of this, do you think something like this would be helpful in helping to focus the efforts of shelter and street outreach teams on what the needs are?
I do. And I understand the need for a separate list because, there's been the expectation that everybody that comes in the shelter who's there for any length of time be added to coordinated entry. Oh, those people are going to be document ready. Most of them we don't have any contact with. We add them because that's like the expectation that we add them. They're probably not going to be there by the time their name gets called. You know what I mean? So
I think it would solve a lot of problems. I think it would also help with things like inactivity.
Yeah.
Or
I think it would.
knowing when folks are ready to take the steps that we need for them to help us with. Sometimes I know, especially when we're talking about some of our shelter population, sometimes folks aren't really willing to engage us. And I think it would be helpful to be able to point to something and say, we need to ultimately get to this point to get you onto this list. If you can take this step with me, we have some additional options that are open.
And I think just having some way to quickly see what they have and what they don't have. Because, we do have multiple street outreach teams. It's not like one person working with, so like my team picks it up from like rescue mission. They may not know what's already been done, but if we have it all in one place.
It's not where you're not duplicating.
Yeah. If it's where it's supposed to be, it should be easy. But
And see, we have all these yes/no fields in coordinated entry that are supposed to establish whether or not that documentation's in place. The problem is those are being completed by end users who are just answering yes, and sometimes in reality that item is not documented. So my thought to this would be those fields would be removed from our existing assessment, and this office, or in the future if there's a different body that's operating coordinated entry, would be the one to actually control those fields, and that would be part of the second report to where you'd be able to clearly see what items are or are not truly documented.
Practical challenge is people get document ready, and if they're homeless long enough, they won't be again. Because I can't just give you a copy of their ID. They have to have their ID. So the chances that they're going to lose that between now and whenever a referral's made is pretty good. If they remain on coordinated entry long enough, that disability verification or the award letters, they're not good anymore. I have to get that again. So there's just also a look at like how long people have been on there, and even if they were document ready at some point, they're probably not now. We need to revisit that ever so often,
Yeah.
Just some sort of periodical review of
Yeah.
we still have what we need. And maybe this person was not referred to SMI originally, but we've established SMI, and so now they might be appropriate for another program. Just more of a review of status of do we have what we need when our referrals ready.
And that review is, I think, a lot easier to do when we're looking at a smaller list versus hundreds of individuals or households.
Right, I agree.
Okay, I think this gives me at least some input to start working on putting together some proposals or plans to present to us next time. Would there be other points of discussion on this item that we want to make now?
So is it appropriate in this committee to, we do by name list meetings for veterans, and we kind of look at the list and talk about each veteran. Is it appropriate to take so many people off the list that are not documented per meeting, and everyone just, have we seen them? Almost like we do with the high utilizer meeting.
So I think this is a good segue to the next agenda item, which is by name list meetings.
Okay.
So looking back at the minutes, it looks like around June or so, this committee had made the decision that they wanted to move forward with reestablishing in-person by name list meetings. But then I couldn't find that ever actually got started. And I definitely don't have a schedule to be coordinating those meetings. So I wanted to touch base on that again. I think that could be another really helpful tool in improving our coordinated entry system. We could do items like you're saying, where we look at, things like who's not document ready. We can also use that as a platform to, when we have people together, identify those who we know are no longer in need because they've been housed or they're no longer in our system. We could go ahead and kind of roll some folks off occasionally. And unfortunately, I apologize, I did not bring it with me. It looks like you guys even got to the point of establishing when we wanted those meetings to take place. They just never got scheduled. I think it was Thursdays, maybe the second Thursday or...
I think, two. Yeah.
Maybe okay, so I can find that information. I should have brought it with me, I'm sorry. But would you guys want to go ahead and start getting those meetings on the calendar for 2023? And I'll send out to everybody what the actual proposed meeting schedule was. But I think that's something that we really need to do. I feel like even if we need to, at some point in the future, move those to a Zoom format to make it easier for folks to attend, I'm open to that, but some form of meeting, I think, needs to happen.
Absolutely, because just like in our high utilizer meetings, we have so much conversation about the individuals and where they are and who can help them. And so if we were doing that with the whole list of who can do a disability verification quickly, who can establish that they're chronically homeless, I just think that's really helpful because I think they're just sitting on the list and kind of languishing right now.
Yeah.
People are putting them on the list, but there's no follow through until they get referred, and then we're having to say, hey, who can do this? And everyone's busy. I get it.
Yeah, I think it would also help refocus a little bit around, there seems sometimes like there's confusion over what actual responsibilities are for each party. I've been privy to some conversations and emails and stuff where someone's really adamant that this step is supposed to be this person's responsibility, and sometimes if we actually go back to our policies, that's not true. So I think we need to kind of re-educate and refresh ourselves on our process and who needs to be working on what and when. So I'll definitely get out to this group the proposed meeting schedule. We'll plan on not starting those meetings until after the first of the year so I can get enough input to make sure that what you guys previously identified as your meeting schedule still works for everyone. but I want to get the ball rolling.
And then to David's point, you know, that the information gets stale or whatever, maybe we can do we might already have the policy, but if we don't, maybe we can have a policy of at what point, you know, the information is good enough. If it's good enough for referral, then we don't have to update it. You know, we can consider them chronically homeless, and that they don't have to be. And I know, like in the balance of state, there's a certain point in the process where you've verified all these things. They might go and stay with a friend for a while, and you're looking for housing. But at this point in time, they were street homeless, chronically homeless, and that's when the clock stops on
Yeah,
that.
if we get to the point of making a referral, as long as the client meets the eligibility at the time of referral, it is theoretically acceptable for that person to go and, for example, stay on someone's couch until the time that their permanent housing unit is available, and we wouldn't necessarily have to require that, no, you have to stay in shelter still so that you can continue to remain eligible. There are some flexibilities like that I think we could tap into.
Yeah.
Any considerations that we need to make in scheduling by nameless meetings? Do we want to, as the previous discussions were, keep that as in person, or do we think we would get a better attendance and participation if we were to consider Zoom?
Probably Zoom.
Everybody else? I know you have your own coordinated entry.
Times meetings and the balance of state at Zoom seems to work well.
I just like Zoom because it allows me to actually do more meetings in a day. I'm not wasting half my time just traveling around.
And multiple people can do other things on their computer, so if you need to look something up, like in our meetings often we'll have
It's
to look
easy
at
for
each
us to
time.
display lists and things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so then we're not sitting here on our phones trying to read HMIS.
Yeah.
All right, then I'll send something out to kind of propose a date and format for that. Also had on here resource guide updates. I know we have that kind of front back, one side's a map, one side's a resource listing, resource guide that oftentimes is given out. I think it was originally developed by the rescue mission, and then I think New Vista took over updates of it.
Yes.
From time to time, we get contacts by organizations that have changed their operations and really want to make sure that it gets changed on those resource guides so that people are having good information. I want to make sure we kind of have some plan because that one was updated in 2022, but I think it was very early in the year, just that we have some kind of process for routinely updating that, who's going to be willing to take it on, making sure that we have updates and a process. Obviously, New Vista's not here. I usually start with who has previously done something before reinventing the wheel. So I guess I can sideline that item for now, and I have to have a follow-up conversation with Dylan anyway, so I can check in with them. Do you all have suggestions for things that you know we need to do to improve that tool?
We can turn it electronic, like get it on the HPI website or Lexington Homelessness or whatever.
Yeah.
And make it like something that's like printable, but also that's easy to change. That may be useful.
Yeah.
Because we are constantly having to update this. This has been, I don't know how many versions of this I've seen.
So many over the years.
They're
I remember
outdated.
everything from the street outreach card that used to be printed up and folded different ways. There's been some version of this for the 14 years I've been in this field.
And some of those original versions are still floating around. So.
Yeah. So my thought would be we definitely are going to have a space for it to live on the LEH website, and we can even see if we can develop a quick Google form or something that would allow or invite agencies to come and make report to us of what those needed changes are. just to help facilitate that process. And it's not necessarily going to be that we have to manually confirm all that information. If agencies have a way to reach out and update kind of their own information for us, we'll still probably need someone to do a little bit of work on modifying the document to reflect those changes, but I think it would make the overall process a lot easier. All right, so those were some of the items that I could clearly identify that this group had been discussing. Now, as we kind of wrap up this section of the agenda, I just want to know what other work or items do you all want to place on this agenda moving forward? Are there other items that you feel strongly about? And I apologize to rely on you all for a lot when there's so few of you. But if you do have things that you feel strongly with either now or if there's something that comes to you after this meeting, if you want to reach out to me, I'm glad to try to include them. I just want to make sure that we, again, move towards a more concrete agenda and mission moving forward. So now we'd be at other issues and public sharing. Does anybody have anything?
Happy holidays.
It will be the last meeting of this group before we go into the holidays. So we will have program performance and evaluation next week. And then, unfortunately, advocacy is very awkwardly placed at the end of the month between Christmas and New Year's, I believe the 28th.
That's correct.
So hopefully we'll have better attendance at those meetings than we did today. But I definitely appreciate those of you that are here. And yes, I support the message of happy holidays to everybody. Hopefully some of us get to take some time off and enjoy time with our families and outside of this work.
I work in the week between Christmas and New Year's, but I bet that 28th meeting is not very well attended.
I'm kind of anticipating a slightly lower attendance.
Yeah, I'll be there.
I probably will too.
Could you do it on Zoom?
We could do Zoom. I think right now it's been published on the calendar that's out there, but we could always send out notice if we think we want to move to Zoom.
Yeah, that might make some people.
I don't really have a current advocacy chair that I can.
I'll give you an update on something that's not relevant to this meeting, but I have a meeting at 1 o'clock. The ID bill, I met with the group from Louisville who was working on presenting a proposal for the ID bill. Their plan is to get it on the docket as soon as the session starts in January.
Okay.
So we're meeting again on the 28th to finalize what that motion is going to be. They're going to put it on there. People are reaching out to the representatives and Congress and the House trying to get support. Our local folks, Reggie Thomas supports it. I would imagine Amanda supports it, so maybe I'll reach out to her since she's going to be there then. But our Lexington folks are supportive of it. David Thayer supports it. So there's a lot of support in the House right now. But it is going on. It's going back on because the old bill just died.
Yeah,
but
because I hadn't heard anything about it in the longest time. I couldn't find anything floating around on their
I
website.
think January 6th, is that when they go back in session? It's the first week of January, but it's going to be presented on the first day, and they hope to get it read that first week.
That's awesome news. And I had planned at the December 28th Advocacy Committee meeting just to have some more conversation around what we do kind of know about the current process and what we can do. I plan to discuss as a potential thing that we could do with Innovative and Sustainable Solutions funding would be to look at maybe having one agency take the lead and kind of manage helping to pay for those IDs for those that are in need, just because talking with the folks at the state, they were not keen on the idea when I told them how many different shelter and street outreach providers that I could potentially have that might want to submit letters to provide payments through different methods. They were really looking for us to consolidate. So I think that might be a good opportunity if we wanted to put a little bit of funding around it. Then we could maybe have an agency that would take on that project, and we could just kind of do it on a reimbursement model. Other public
That
sharing?
meeting's at 1, so I will maybe have an update after that
Okay.
for the group.
I'll be in that meeting too.
Okay, cool.
Anything else? All right, our next meeting will be on February 1st of 2023. It's taken me a long time to even in these agendas start to make that shift to writing 2023. And we're going to be at our new location of Don Ball Campus Center. So thank you, Hope Center, for agreeing to host us. And if there's nothing else, do we have a motion
Free
to
parking.
adjourn?
Yeah, exactly, free working.
That also might be why people aren't here. Move to adjourn.
All right, and that is 2:42. Thank you all for being a small but mighty group today.
I think we got a lot done.
Considering how many people are here.